Hi students, in this video I'm going to talk about scenarios and requirements. I don't always in every video kind of go over the reading, but in this video what I'd like to do is create sort of a bridge between the reading and the skills you need for the homework. So the reading is very theoretical, and I want to show you how you can take what you learned from the reading and turn it into a skill set. So we're going to talk about how you create scenarios and how you create requirements. So let's get started. The first thing I'd like to do is just remind you what we're doing in this class. You are walking through the goal-directed design process, and it started with research. So you did some research on users. Now, you didn't do all the kinds of research that are available to you. For example, you didn't do an audit. A lot of organizations that are designing a digital product already have a product that maybe isn't cutting it, and they're trying to redesign it or to make a new one that's better. And so they would conduct an audit where they would look at what they already had and sort of try to figure out what was it doing, what was working, what wasn't. So obviously you didn't do one of those. You also didn't do stakeholder interviews. You don't have a client, for example, who is a stakeholder who you need to understand more about. But you did do user observation. And then you did some modeling. Again, you didn't create a persona, but you did create a storyboard that gave you kind of a day in the life example of your archetypical user. And there's other models that are available that you didn't explore, but you did create that storyboard, and you did look at user goals, and you did try to understand what the typical user is like. And now in this week we're moving into the requirements definition. So now you have to figure out, okay, we're going to make this digital product that is going to help the users accomplish their goals. Now you have to figure out, what are the requirements for that product? What does the product need to do in order to help people achieve those goals? So you're going to look at requirements, and in order to create requirements, you need to create some context scenarios. And then we're going to delve a little bit into the framework definition this week, because after you come up with requirements, you're going to start brainstorming some different tools that can meet those requirements. We're going to focus more on framework in the future. So we're dipping a little bit into that framework area. This is page 24 of your book. I suggest that you print it out and hang it on your wall, because we're going to return to this over and over and over again. Okay, so what are scenarios? Well, in the general sense, scenarios are just examples of users and what they do, and they're presented as narratives. So when you created a storyboard, you were kind of making, in a general sense, a scenario of users. You were taking everything you learned about users and putting it into one experience that was presented in one storyboard. So you're sort of synthesizing all the research into one day-in-the-life type storyboard. But what a scenario really is, when we say the word scenario in goal-directed design, what we're really talking about is a context scenario. So you already did a storyboard of what is currently going on with your users. Context scenarios help you envision what could be. So right now your users are doing X. How can you help them do Y to achieve the same goal, but in a better way? So this is your context scenario. And to show the context scenario, your deliverable is an ideal user situation that you describe in text. So to show what typical users are like, your deliverable is a storyboard or a persona. This week, to show what could be, what their life could be like, you're using context scenarios, and the deliverable is a written description. And the overall purpose of these scenarios is to understand users, to kind of keep in mind the context and the environment in which they're doing whatever it is they're doing, and to look at things like organizational pressures and how can you meet all of these pressures and all of these contextual and environmental pressures. So what are requirements? Well, basically you take your goal as a researcher and a designer. What is it you're trying to do, which in this case, improve X, improve how users do X. And then you're taking what users do now and what they could do that would be better. And then you're finding specific tools that help people do that. That's requirements. So first of all, your goal, that's really your vision statement. You're going to create that this week. Then what do users do? Well, you already looked at what they currently do and created a storyboard. Now you're going to look at what they could do, which is a contextual scenario, or excuse me, a context scenario. And then finally, you'll figure out what kind of tools will help make that context scenario a reality. I'm sorry, I'm getting really excited. This is a very excellent design process. So this week you've looked at what is, now you're envisioning what could be. So just to review, a requirement is a statement about an intended product that specifies what it should do or how it should perform. And it's very open. So we'll get to that. I have an example at the end of this lecture where I'll walk you through the process that you're going to use this week. So how do you make requirements? Well, you have an overall goal for the project. You have a series of usability and user experience goals you need to meet. You need to make sure that each user requirement moves toward the overall goal, and you need to make sure that the user requirement has a user experience and usability goal. So really what this means is that you have an overall goal for the project. I am trying to improve how X is done. And then you have a series of goals within that you need to make sure actually help the user do it better. So if you think that having a giant help button on the Blackboard site that would instantly contact me if you needed help. If your overall goal was to make Blackboard easier to use and that was your solution, you would have to kind of make sure, like, what a requirement like contacting the professor at all hours of the day really accomplished that goal. We haven't discussed usability in great depth yet. We will talk about it more when you start doing usability testing. But what you need to understand about usability is that usability describes the quality of a designed digital product. Whether something is usable just is a quality. Either it's usable or it's not, or it's kind of usable, but you're looking at the quality of something. And something that is highly usable is easy to use, it's effective to use by allowing people to actually accomplish their goals. It's efficient to use, so there's not a lot of steps. It's just, efficient, gets things done quickly. It's safe to use. It has good utility, meaning it's useful to the person and they understand that it's useful. It's easy to learn, and it's easy to remember how to use. So there's certain technologies that are very usable, like the iPhone. It gets a lot done, it gets it done efficiently, it's safe, you don't have to worry about, well, maybe you do, but in the past you didn't have to worry about like accidentally pressing the wrong button and having all of your personal contacts emailed to 10 people or something. It was safe. It has good utility, it's useful, and you know that. It's easy to learn. You learn just by doing as you go, and it's easy to remember. You can stop using an iPhone for a year and come back and still use it, and you don't have to relearn how to use it. And it's important to know these usability goals because every requirement has to meet some kind of usability goal. Now, after you define the requirements, you start defining the framework. And this is where I talked about we're dipping a little bit into framework. So first we define the requirements. What kinds of things do people need to be able to do with our technology? And then we start looking at the specifics. What tools allow that to happen? So after requirements, you start getting into framework requirements. And we're going to look at framework requirements. You're going to look at them for homework. Okay, so what's a step-by-step process for making requirements? If I need to make one, how do I know what to do? Well, Cooper suggests 5 steps. First, create your problem and vision statement. So identify the problem and then identify what your vision of solving the problem is. And I have an example. The thing to keep in mind here is that your vision of solving it is not feature-based. It's based on what part of the problem or the process can be improved. Then you want to brainstorm. So you want to think about different ways of accomplishing your vision. Next, you want to identify user expectations. So what are people's mental models? Remember, Cooper talks about mental models, and he says people generally don't really know how technology is working. When you send an email, you don't really know the technology that makes that happen. You don't know what code language is used. You don't know what servers the email goes to. You don't know, and you don't care. You have a mental model of what's happening. So mental models are how you think something is happening. So when you send an email, to you, you're just typing it, you press send, and it magically goes to the person. You don't need to know the implementation behind it. So in order to create a good product, when we're synthesizing requirements, we want to keep in mind, well, what do people think is happening here? We want them to be able to press send and think it's magic. How do we know what people think the magic is? Then we create context scenarios. So we want to describe contexts in which something is happening, keeping in mind the environment. And this is where Cooper says, pretend it's magic. So when you're creating context scenarios, you're still not getting into the technology. You're still not getting into the features. Pretend that you are a tech genius wizard and you can make anything happen. So if your goal is to make Blackboard a better user experience by allowing, well, let's say your goal is to make Blackboard more personal so that you have a personal connection with your professor. One thing I would ding Blackboard for is that I think it's very difficult as a professor to get to know you guys. And so if my goal is to improve Blackboard's communication powers so that it's more personalized, here's where I want to just come up with my magical solution. So I'm not going to say, let's put a button on it. I'm going to say, Blackboard should let you connect to your professor at all times of the day instantly. That's a context. That's a requirement that's built on a context scenario. And the requirement is you're just being really specific about how you can achieve or what you need to do to achieve the context scenarios. So if your context scenario is, Megan logs into Blackboard and her students' faces are on it. And, that's too specific. Megan logs into Blackboard and connects with her students instantly, wherever they are. That's a good context scenario. The requirement, I just take that context scenario and I make it more specific. There's a specific way of doing that I'll show you in this video. So as you can see, context scenarios and requirements are actually difficult because it's so hard not to start with features. You'll notice in my example of Blackboard, I started with the feature. Megan logs in and she sees pictures of your faces. No, that's a feature. Get rid of it. So how do you create a problem and vision statement? Now I'm going to walk you through this process. This is what you're doing for homework. First, problem statement. What is the problem? And I'll give you an example. I did a ton of research and then created a product for museums. I love museums. I go to them all the time. I am a creeper, so I like to just sit in the museum and watch people and see what they do. I like to just go look at all the stuff. I like to give tours through museums. I'm obsessed. And so I noticed in all this time I was spending in museums, watching other people and having visitors that I was showing around, I noticed that a lot of mobile apps at museums, people don't really use them and they don't do a whole lot. I looked at what am I doing in the museum? I'm trying to learn, I'm trying to show people, I'm trying to point at different things I think are interesting. Mobile apps do not let you do that. Instead, a lot of museum mobile apps are just the website on a phone. So it's just like a map. It's just like showing you when the gift shop is open. And I actually did some research and I found out that over the last 2 decades, research into mobile offerings at museums has found that museum apps tend to isolate people. They make people feel isolated and they make people feel distracted. And that is not at all what is happening in museums when people don't have mobile apps. When people go to museums and they look at things, they're engaged, they're talking to other people, they feel like they're part of something. So these apps just don't make sense. So the problem statement, museum mobile offerings don't support the kind of free choice learning that's actually happening in museums. They're isolating visitors and they're distracting visitors. Now, what's my vision? How am I going to make it better? This is my vision of what could be. What could be better? Well, let's do this. Let's make a new product and let's have it help museum visitors learn from the exhibit materials and each other so they're not isolated and they're not distracted. And how do I want to do that? Through interactive and social media. So my vision statement is just simply, let's make an app where people are engaged, where people are learning, where they're actually doing the things they do in a museum. So that's my vision. And now I start to look at how do I accomplish that vision in a way that helps users accomplish their goals. So then I brainstorm. I don't have an example of brainstorming. It's all scribbledy notes in like 10 different notebooks. So, and by 10 different notebooks, I really mean like 2 notebooks and a napkin and like some Post-it notes. but I'm not able to show it to you. But I thought about, I brainstormed, I just jotted down lots of ideas. How do I help museum visitors learn? And so I'm like, okay, interactive media, social media, Twitter, I just threw it all down. Doesn't matter what it is, as long as it is related to that vision. Now I look at user expectations. So what are people's mental models? What do they expect? Well, they expect a mobile app that's easy to use, that's engaging, which obviously current mobile apps are not meeting that because they're distracting people. People want something to do. In my user interviews and my studies of other museums and what research they're doing, most people who are interviewed about museum mobile apps mention doing. They mention action words. They say, I want to take pictures. I want to talk. So they're looking for something to do, and they don't want just the website on the app. And I know this from my user research. Next, I create context scenarios. So you guys didn't create personas, but you have to kind of imagine a persona in this step. And in this step, my persona is Sarah. So I looked at what's happening in museums. Well, most visitors go in groups. They're not by themselves. Most visitors go just a couple times a year. And I observed people and I observed what they were doing. And I've read a lot of research on how people go through museums. And so Sarah is kind of my persona. So Sarah embodies what a lot of visitors embody. She isn't super into museums like I am. She likes going. It's kind of like a once or twice a year thing. She wants to see the big famous stuff. So she's kind of my persona. And then in this context scenario, I imagine, what if she had an app that was perfect? So in this context scenario, I gave her an app that does whatever she needs to do. And that's where Cooper says, imagine it's magic. So my first scenario, Sarah is in town for the weekend. She's visiting a friend from college. Neither she nor her friend have ever been to this museum, but Sarah has heard about how this museum has some famous sculptures, which in my research I found is very common, and she wants to see them before she goes home. So you guys might be familiar with this. Maybe you go to New York and you know that there's famous museums. You want to be able to say you went to them, you want to see what they have, but you're not super into anything in particular there. So she gets to the museum, she buys her tickets, and here's my first context scenario. She uses the app to see where the sculptures are. So I'm not giving any features. I'm not saying she gets a map, she gets a list. I'm saying she gets into the app and it shows her where the sculptures are. Number two, Sarah's friend's not really into the museum, but she wants to make sure Sarah has a good time. This is also very common with museum visitors. A lot of museum visitors are just trying to help kids or to help teenagers or someone else in their family or friends have a good experience. So Sarah and her friend see these famous sculptures that Sarah came for. They're taking pictures and they post them online. So again, I'm not coming up with the features. I'm not saying, oh, the app has Instagram or the app has a camera. I just say, what is Sarah doing? How can my app help her? Number three, Sarah and her friend wander around in the exhibit after seeing the sculptures. They look at the app to see if there's anything else famous. So I'm not, again, no features, just what is Sarah trying to do? She's here to see the famous stuff. So my app is going to help her see the famous stuff. After they've seen all the well-known stuff, Sarah and her friend are kind of going through an exhibit. The research on museum visitors shows that for the last part of their visit, they tend to just kind of run through everything because they're running out of time. So Sarah and her friend, that's where they are. They're running out of time. They're trying to see everything. So they're like, you know what? Should we get anything? Should we see anything else before we leave? We've only got 20 minutes. So they look at the app to see if there's anything worth stopping at. So again, no features, just what is the app going to help her do? And then finally, they consult the app to see if the gift shop is open. They're on their way out. They want to know, can we buy stuff? They look in the app. But again, no features. Just this idea. And my next step is to synthesize from these scenarios requirements. And requirements must be written in a certain way. Objects, actions, context, goals, usability goals. So Sarah, for example, really wanted to see the famous stuff. Oops, I typed this in earlier. Let me get this out. So Sarah really wants to see the famous stuff. So what is a requirement of my app? That it help users find their way. What's the object? The museum, through the museum. What's the context? Also the museum. How? Easily and safely, right? They don't want to get lost in the basement. They don't want to get separated while they're trying to use this app and like get kidnapped. So safely. What are some other requirements? If we look at some of the context scenarios, all the things Sarah and her friend are doing, what else do they need to be able to do? Well, they need to be able to access important mobile content. What's the context? Before, during, and after their visit. How? Easily. Because Sarah could very easily pull the app up on her phone before she visits the museum to see if there's anything at the museum. So my context scenario only showed you 5. I actually have about 15 or 20 for this project I worked on. And so my requirements, some of these are coming from scenarios I didn't show you, but what else did Sarah need to be able to do? Well, you notice that she was taking the picture at the sculpture. She needs to be able to communicate with what? Other visitors. What context? At the museum. And we could even say at home, right? Because those pictures might be for her friends and family. How? Efficiently, because she just wants to snap the picture and be done. So I synthesized these requirements from the context scenarios. Now, the next step is to move from requirements into framework requirements. Now, I just need to figure out what kind of tools help people do this. I can get rid of this too. So what kind of tool would help Sarah and other users find their way through the museum easily and safely? And I could use Google Maps. I guess I could make my own app. That seems unnecessarily difficult. I could use MapQuest, but either way, a digital turn-by-turn map. So that's a framework requirement that I've now synthesized from my overall requirements. Now, how can Sarah personalize the experience instantly and effectively? Well, she could filter by popularity, right? Because she only wanted to see the famous stuff, or maybe by category, or maybe by subject, and only see stuff in the museum that is popular or fits a category she wants. So now I start to come up with framework requirements. These are different than requirements. Requirements are these lofty goals. Goals like learn about the artifact before, during, and after very easily. Well, how do I actually do that? We want to have some educational text, right? Educational text would be great for learning. Maybe Wikipedia would be great for learning. Since this has to be before, during, and after the visit and has to be for each artifact, maybe each artifact has a page with learning materials on it. So now I start to come up with the framework requirements, which I hope by now you'll understand is different than the actual requirements, the general requirements. And I'm not going to keep typing in here, but as I moved into the framework requirements, I asked myself, what tools accomplish those requirements? Well, communication could be discussion board, information could be, learning could be an about section. Since this stuff has to be done easily is a big usability requirement. I could have how-to videos. Again, finding things was a huge requirement, especially for Sarah in our example, so some kind of GPS mapping, etc. So your homework is to study some other apps and try to figure out what the tools they're showing, what requirements they meet. So you're going to sort of reverse engineer. You're going to look at a mobile app, and if you don't have a mobile phone, I suggest you borrow one. Contact me if you absolutely have no access to one, and I'll come up with a solution. We'll come up with a solution for you. But you're going to look at a mobile app, and you're going to ask yourself, what are some of these tools? And then what requirements do you think those tools are meeting? And then you're going to go through the steps. 1 through 5, vision statement, problem statement, all the way to requirements and framework requirements on your own based on the users that you researched last week. So let me know if you have any questions about this assignment. I personally think it's a fun assignment, but I'm highly biased. Just keep in mind that I'm asking some very specific things of you. So your user requirements really need to be that action, object, context, usability, and then later you come in and you tell me what is the tool. So I'm really looking for that exact setup on those. So make sure you read the assignment and you know exactly what specifics I'm asking of you. But if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. I would be glad to discuss the homework with you or really anything about scenarios and requirements.